It is time to wrap up the Irish Readathon. As you probably know by now, the Irish Readathon is an annual readathon where myself and my co-host Aoife devote our time to celebrating and discussing and reading Irish books. So throughout all of March, the only thing I read are books by Irish authors. And I'm going to be completely honest, this has not been my favourite readathon. Now, in saying that, the bar is so incredibly high. Every year for the readathon, I typically read several books that are new favourite. And I just didn't have that as much this year. And also, I just had a lot of thoughts, a lot of things going on mentally in March. In saying that, I still read lots of great books, just some of them weren't as good as I'd hoped they would be. Also, by the way, I have moved us back into the living room. I have been filming in my bedroom for the past few months, and I just felt like being back with the big bookshelves in the living room today. So I am going to start with a book that I did really enjoy, and that was Whatever Happened to Madeline Stone by Louise O'Neill. So Louise O'Neill is one of my absolute favourite authors, and Whatever Happened to Madeline Stone is one of my most anticipated reads for the entire year. So I was really pleased that I managed to get hold of a proof copy so I could read it a little bit early before it comes out. I have pre-ordered the hardback, which should be arriving in a few days. This is a novel that explores fame and power and sisterhood. We are following two different time periods, one in the early noughties and one in the 2020s, specifically 2002 and 2025. We pick up the story with Chelsea, who in 2025 lives an incredibly luxurious life. She has so much money. She's incredibly wealthy, but having previously been incredibly famous has now taken a step back from the spotlight. Back in the early noughties, Chelsea, along with her twin sister Madeline, who gives her name to the title of this novel, were child stars on a successful TV show. However, the route of their respective careers and lives go in very different directions, however, when Chelsea is unexpectedly cast as a lead in a huge TV show. This catapults her to becoming one of the most famous women on the planet. Whereas Madeline's star begins to fade, and eventually she does actually disappear. She goes missing. And in 2025, it has been decades since Chelsea has heard from or about her sister. This changes when a storage locker reveals secrets and information about Madeline's life that gives Chelsea hope and suspicion that her sister is out there, her sister is alive. And because of this, we are re-exploring Chelsea and Madeline's history. It's a book that takes a look at the dangers of fame in youth, which I think is a topic that is getting more and more attention and coverage as celebrities who found their fame at a very early age in the noughties are sharing more about their experiences, whether that's in their memoirs or in documentaries. It's a book that looks at who holds power within those media industries, and it's a book that explores the rivalry and competitiveness and jealousy that can exist within sisterhood. There is a mystery that runs throughout it as we try and uncover what did happen to Madeline Stone. And I thought that was very well paced throughout the novel. I thought it was incredibly rigorously researched in terms of how the celebrity world was operating in the noughties. And overall, I really enjoyed this book. It is not a new favorite Louise O'Neill novel, but the bar for that is so incredibly high because I just completely adore her work. This was the first book that I read in the readathon, and I did get off to a really good start because of that. Now, I did read a few books that have a thematic link of exploring celebrity. I am going to stick with those. I read Actress by Anne Enright. So this is the story of the fictitious Irish theatre legend Catherine O'Hara, told from the perspective of her daughter Nora. It follows her career and relationships and her relationship with her daughter from her early days of fame in Hollywood to her time in Dublin and in London's West End. I love the theatre, so I really enjoyed the way theatre culture was explored throughout the book. There is also a mystery that runs throughout the book as Nora learns more about her mother's life, and also we learn that Catherine committed a senseless crime in her middle age, which is ultimately something that caused her to eventually go mad. It's another book that explores the corrosive nature of celebrity, but what I found really interesting about this book was the differing perspective it took. I've read a lot about the nature of celebrity and parent-child dynamics when the parent is the one that is incredibly pushy, trying to earn a lot of money through their child and also living unfulfilled dreams vicariously through their child. This was actually the mother being the one that was incredibly famous. And I found how that flipped that dynamic that I was used to reading about. I really appreciated that. What I also found really interesting about this book was its exploration of Irishness, and specifically a desire to perform Irishness. Because not only is Catherine a stage performer by profession, performing Irishness is also something that is incredibly important to her. And I think whilst the novel doesn't deal with this topic directly, how it really resonated with me was within the context of what I call like the kneecapification of London, and I think like England more broadly. As someone that like is an Irish person living in England, I could talk at length about like English people's desire to be and perform Irishness. And I think observing that in like my contemporary world alongside the context of like similar topics within this book was very interesting. Anne Enright is such a good writer. I always get a lot of value from her books, and this one was no different. And then the final book that explores Faye was Esther Is Now Following You by Tanya Sweeney, and this is actually one of my favorite reads throughout the month of March. Her main character is Esther, and one day in a park she locks eyes with this guy called Ted. And at this point in his career, Ted is kind of like an emerging celebrity. He's an actor. And from that moment forward, Esther feels this like very intense connection with Ted. And what begins with like a relatively innocent like crush on a celebrity, like following them online, gradually progresses into something that is genuinely like quite sinister. The book explores like parasocial relationships with celebrity and what people will do out of obsession and infatuation. We chart Esther's journey from like relatively innocent like online curiosity to like joining fan forums and eventually uprooting her entire life to go to Canada in pursuit of this man who has become increasingly famous. And her behavior is like so unacceptable and unhinged, like the lengths she is going to try and get to this man that she is so thoroughly convinced that she is meant to be with. He just needs to like realize it. Actually, what I wasn't expecting from this book was for it to be so emotionally tender. I won't say too much about the exact circumstances that we find Esther's life in when we pick up this story with her, because I think it's just so great to kind of see that unfold and very kind of emotionally resonant to see that unfold for yourself if you want to read this book. But even though I found none of what she did acceptable, I did find a huge amount of like empathy for her, because she's a woman that is on a real breaking point and has been through some really difficult stuff, and she treats people like terribly. What she has been through does not justify what she has done. However, it does give like context. Really felt for Esther in a way that I wasn't anticipating. And also the dialogue in this book is so sharp and witty and precise and emotional at the right times. I would highly recommend this book. Stay on a positive note with the stuff I really enjoyed. I read Anybody Out There by Marian Keyes. This is my second Marian Keyes book of the year, and I enjoyed this one a lot more than I did Angels. So this is the fourth book in the Walsh family saga. So you can read like all of the Walsh sister books individually, but I have been like reading them in order. So we begin this story with Anna Walsh, who is recovering from some sort of accident in her parents' house in Dublin. And we're initially following that kind of claustrophobic way that particularly like Irish mammies take care of their kids. But we know that Anna is desperate to get back to New York where she lives. She's desperate to go back to her job, her home, and her husband Aidan. And for reasons that are unclear, she can't seem to get any contact from Aidan. Like something has happened and he is not responding to like any of her calls, any of her emails, nothing. Eventually Anna does go back to New York and attempts to try and rebuild her life. That is kind of all I can really say about the plot of this book. What I will say is that it is a beautiful exploration of a woman trying to rebuild, with moments of hilarity and moments of absolute heartbreak in a way that I think Marian Keyes is the only writer that can completely nail that juxtaposition of hilarious and heartbreaking. Anna has this like high-flying job in the beauty industry, which I just found like a lot of fun. Now, Marian Keyes books are quite chunky. And I think the thing about the Walsh sister books in particular, like, even though this book is centered on Anna, there is like a fair amount of stuff about like the other sisters to kind of just propel their stories forward a bit more. And I will say, like, there is one subplot about another of the sisters that I could have done without, to be honest. I will say, overall, I completely adored this book. Like, I do feel like if there maybe wasn't like so much of that particular subplot that I just didn't find interesting, this possibly would have been like a 5-star read. Honestly, this book like completely broke my heart. Okay, next up I read Fair Play by Louise Hegarty. I really wanted to love this book because the premise sounds amazing, the cover is sensational. However, my overall feeling around this book is like, it's okay for some things to be short stories and not full-length novels, especially when like the idea is so much better than the execution. This book begins with a murder mystery party that Abigail is hosting for her brother Benjamin's birthday. However, things take a twist when Benjamin does actually end up dead at this party. What we then enter into is an incredibly meta locked room mystery. So the detective arrives. None of the suspects in Abigail and Benjamin's like friendship circle are allowed to leave a house. However, the book is then incredibly meta. So we are introduced to kind of like rules and stylistic choices around locked room mysteries. And the text becomes very like self-referential because the detective will start to say things like, well, it cannot possibly be this because this breaks this convention of locked roomed mysteries. Or he will say something like, well, I'm going to revisit this later in chapter 18 when this happens. It's like we have stepped into a murder mystery novel that is like self-aware of the fact that it is a murder mystery novel. And that is initially like incredibly fun. I will say like halfway through the book, maybe 2/3 of the way through the book, it becomes very obvious what is like actually happening. Like, it goes from being very clever to being quite heavy-handed and actually a bit irritating and incredibly repetitive, by which I mean like literal significant passages of text are repeated. Like, you do not need to reread them. They are the same. Like, there comes a point in reading this novel where it's like, oh, okay, I get what is happening here. I see what the author is doing. And then there is still like a significant amount of novel left. I'm a bit like, did this need to be a novel? Could it have been like a novella or like even a short story? It's just quite frustrating because like maybe the first like quarter or third of the book, I was like, this is great. This is going to be 5 stars. I'm having the best time. And then it just declines. I'd love to hear from you if you have read this book, and I'd love to hear what you thought of it because it really was like a book of 2 halves for me. Another book that I felt like quite mid about before we get back to some books that I really enjoyed was May All Your Skies Be Blue by Fina Scarlett. So I did really enjoy Fina Scarlett's debut novel, Boys Don't Cry, although enjoy is probably the wrong word, like, because it's heartbreaking. I would say like appreciate is probably a more apt term. And looking at reviews for this book online, there are so many readers that found May All Your Skies Be Blue just as emotionally impactful as Boys Don't Cry, and that was just not the case for me. So it's another book that is told in kind of 2 different time periods. In the early 1990s, following a character named Shauna, who has just kind of like moved to the area, and her mom has like this hair salon, and throughout the book we are getting kind of snippets in and out of their lives told through like the people that are sitting in the salon chair. And I quite liked that as a device and like a way of getting to know a cast of characters. What is really meant to be like the emotional crux of this novel is the relationship between Shauna and Dean. And we follow them throughout a period of time, and then like years later when they have lost contact, of them kind of like fumbling through their feelings for one another. And I think just why this book didn't work for me was because I felt no sense of emotional connection to either of them or their relationship. I felt like the connection between them was really like emphasized and like told, but not really shown. I just couldn't really see why they felt the way they did about each other. And because of that, it makes what is meant to be like the culmination of the novel and like significant emotional impact, it meant that it just felt really flat for me. I didn't find it emotionally impactful at all. I found a lot of the stuff around Shauna's mother more emotionally impactful, but even at that, like, not that much. What I was really impressed by and did love was like the use of Dublin dialect in the book. I really, really appreciate when someone can do that well. And the use of dialogue was something that I found that like really grounded me in a sense of time and place. So that I really enjoyed. But yeah, overall, I didn't cry. And for a book whose like main selling point is like, this will make you cry, this will make you so emotional. If it doesn't make you cry and make you feel really emotional, then like you just don't get what was promised. Okay, back to some books that I really enjoyed. I read Fun and Games by John Patrick McHugh. And I would say this very firmly enters like the category of books, which is like, if you read and loved Normal People, then you should absolutely read this book. You're following 17-year-old John, who is in that kind of limbo summer in between doing his Leaving Cert exams, which are like the final state exams that you do in your final year of school, before you head off to college, university, whatever it is that you're doing after those exams. And that actually plays a significant role in the book. It's like the differing things that people want to do afterwards. But he's in that limbo summer and he should be really enjoying it, but like his life is more complicated than that. Lives on this small island, which can be like quite claustrophobic, working lots of really like mind-numbing shifts at a local hotel. He starts a kind of situationship with a girl that he works with there who is slightly older than he is. He started playing for the local like senior football team, which kind of makes him feel like he is like this local celebrity. And on top of that, his mother has had some like nude photographs leaked, which is obviously a huge source of gossip in like a small island town. It brings a lot of attention to his family and himself that he doesn't really want. It really damages his parents' relationship. And the novel explores John's perception of himself and those around him and how those perceptions are quite warped. It's simultaneously so incredibly insecure, but also has notions of grandeur, which I think is just a juxtaposition that is so applicable to, quite honestly, like so many Irish men that come from smaller towns, especially if they play for the senior football team. It largely looks at people's desires to get out of their hometown communities and how those people with an intense desire to get out can often judge and look down on people that live in their communities. And the book is largely about this young man who could have a very loving, wonderful relationship with a girl that he really cares about if he wasn't such a judgmental, snobby, social elite misogynist and just completely gets in his own way at every single opportunity because he doesn't understand his own masculinity, he doesn't understand himself, he doesn't understand how to give or receive love and affection. He's a character that simultaneously makes you furious with him, although you still feel sympathetic towards, but you also just kind of like pity. I think managing to achieve a melting pot of that within one character is a huge accomplishment. Actually, the more I talk about and think about this book, the more I love it. Great. I will read everything that this author writes now. I am so incredibly impressed with this book. And then finally, I read a children's book. I read The Monsters of Rookhaven by Paul Rick Kenny. This is the second book that I've read from this author. I actually enjoyed it far more than I did the previous one I read, which was Tin. This is just like a great, spooky, gothic middle grade book. We are following what happens when a pair of orphaned siblings called Tom and Jem end up stumbling into Rookhaven, and they should not be able to get to Rookhaven, where Mirabelle and her unusual family live. There should be like a barrier between the human world and where Mirabelle and her family live. And because of this rift between the two worlds, it is incredibly dangerous for things to be like moving in and out. It's a book that does explore like how we misjudge people from other places and how we perceive an idea of monstrousness. Ultimately, this is a book that kind of explores what it means to be a monster, and a book that demonstrates that we often have more similarities than differences between people that live in completely different worlds to us. It's also a book that very delicately explores the impact of war and loss of life on families in a really heartbreaking way, but wrapped up in this package of just pure like spooky goodness. Like, this is the perfect Halloween read. It is the perfect read for any kid or grown-up that really loves things like Wednesday and the Addams Family. Spiders feature a bit too prominently at times for my liking, but I will forgive that. I do have the sequel on my shelves, which I will save for Halloween time. But yeah, overall, really impressed with this book. Really, really enjoyed reading it. I am also just over halfway through reading Iris Murdoch's The Sea, and I am really enjoying reading this one, although I should say I'm actually enjoying listening to this one because I am listening to Richard E. Grant read this on audiobook, and it is a joy and a pleasure. I am really enjoying this book. However, I don't actually think the Irish Readathon was the right time for me to pick this up because I do think it somewhat negatively impacted my reading experience this month to have like 2 really chunky books on the go. I think I would have had a better time with the readathon had I been like splitting up my reading with some smaller books. So obviously I am going to keep reading this one, but I do want to just like devote a lot more time to really enjoying it as opposed to like trying to get through it quickly for a readathon. But there we have it. That is my wrap up of the Irish Readathon. I just want to say thank you so much if you participated in the readathon, even if it meant you read just like 1 Irish book in the month. We are so grateful for everyone that like joins in and participates and celebrates and uplifts the readathon. There is like a lot of celebration of Irish literature at the minute, and I'm just really proud that Aoife and I have been running this readathon for such a long time. Like next year will be the 10th year that we are doing this, and it's just been such a brilliant part of my reading year. Like even in an instance like this where I'm like, oh, this wasn't my favorite readathon, I still read like so many things that I really loved. It's just been such an impactful part of my life, and I'm so grateful for it, and I'm so grateful for like anyone that joins in. If you did, I would love to hear what you read down in the comments, but if you want to let me know you're here and you don't have anything in particular to say, as with all of the Irish Readathon videos, leave me a green emoji of your choosing. That is it for me today. I hope you're well, and I'll speak to you in my next video. Slán.